you're going to do one thing different after listening to the show today. That would be to talk to the people doing the work. And I say talk, but actually what I really mean is listen. And so you can just go up to someone and say, hey, tell me what's happening today. What's going on? What are we looking at here? And in that conversation, if you're approaching that conversation with humility and respect, and you're genuinely listening, that person you'll find is probably taking a decent amount of pride in what they do.
Hello, everybody. Chris G here, Hard Hat CEO, and today we're in for a treat. Something we don't talk about much, but it's very important because everybody, no matter what industry you're in, can be concerned about safety, and we don't want our people hurt, and it keeps the morale up when people don't die. And that sounds silly, but that's the truth. And we're going to get into that serious conversation here. Got a friend to do that with me, all the way from New Zealand. That's Desai Link. Welcome, Des. How are you today?
I'm very good, thanks. Pleasure to be here.
Des, can you tell us a little bit about yourself before we get into our discussion?
Yeah, sure. So I studied law in Western Australia, where I'm from, and I drove forklifts to put myself through law school. I graduated, became a lawyer, realized it wasn't for me, and went back to driving forklifts, and then found my way into occupational health and safety. And that was originally in transport, and then I went off to work in oil and gas in a fly-in, fly-out project in Western Australia, and then ended up in construction, working in health and safety. And here I am.
So obviously, we're going to talk about a few things, obviously, after something happens, but what's the best way to prepare not to have issues, I guess, with safety?
Yeah, it's kind of the $1 million question, isn't it? You know, like everyone wants to avoid accidents. What's the silver bullet that's going to stop that? And it's a really difficult one. And probably the best answer that I can give you is just to understand work as it's performed at the coalface on any given time. And you understand work by talking to people and understanding the challenges they face. And all of this sounds really obvious when it's spoken out loud like this, but it's so easy for that not to happen, you know, for people to stay in the office, for people to look at the metrics, for people to look at the reports or video footage, but just go there, just go and talk to people and look at what's happening. And you can get a pretty keen understanding of what's happening and whether it's safe or not based on that.
When I talk about safety, sometimes a lot of it's just common sense. And I know we have over here in the States, OSHA, and sometimes even they make rules based on, like you said, they're not really talking to people. They're just kind of looking at a situation and making a blanket rule that makes no sense. What's a good way for even contractors kind of stay legal, stay safe, most importantly, and but still be productive?
Well, I guess staying legal, I mean, I'm not currently an attorney, so I can't comment on what will keep them safe legally. But what I can say is, what I can say is, look at the first principles. Like any given activity, why are you doing it for a start?
Yeah.
So you know, you need to, in order to think in terms of first principles, you need to understand what the law is. So being familiar with the regulations and standards that apply to your work is very important. And then making sure people are competent to perform that. And this is an ongoing challenge. This isn't just something that you do and it's done forever. It's a perpetual challenge of just making sure people are competent to do what they're doing, and then monitoring and checking that. And this is, again, there's no sort of surprises here with what I'm saying, hopefully for most people, but it's actually really hard to apply that on a day-to-day basis really consistently.
Before we get into what we do when something happens, what size company do you think? We were a large company. We had actually a safety person who was responsible for all this. Is there a certain size company when you recommend that they have somebody dedicated to safety?
That's a good question. I think when administering safety becomes enough of a full-time role, you would need to get to that point. I would like to think that if you're in a high-risk industry like construction, you shouldn't necessarily you should already hold the expertise on how to do a job safely. if you're a competent work at heights operator, you should know that regulation back to front. There should be no challenge. There should be no need for you to seek external advice. Sorry, not external advice, but there should be no need for you to get a specialist in to do that. Everyone performing that work should be a specialist. That goes back to that competency part that I was talking about earlier. It's, but like I said, it's a challenge. It's an everyday thing.
Everyday thing. We didn't have training is very important, obviously, and especially with new hires, because they don't necessarily know, or they might not come from a construction background. A lot of guys are hiring people that just to have a hand on site. So training is important for that part. But is it ongoing training always, or you got to decide what's productive for you and what makes sense for your group? Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. And I think it's important to draw a distinction between training and competence. Because you can be trained in something. For instance, when I first started driving forklifts, I was terrible. I had my forklift license, I was trained, but I definitely wasn't competent. And it took me many months to learn and become good at that. And I'm grateful to my employer for sticking with me at the time. But it's a skill that I needed to practice day in, day out. And I think drawing that distinction between training and competence, someone can be trained and not be competent, and vice versa. Someone can be competent but not necessarily hold that specific license.
Now, you wrote a book about safety, and tell us a little about that, would you? About the book itself?
Sure. So the book is called Beyond the Incident, and it really was born out of my transition from law into health and safety, because when I made that transition, I did some health and safety investigation training and realized that the way that the safety industry, and this includes the United States, it's all over, the English-speaking world, the way they go about investigating an incident, a safety incident that might have happened at the workplace, their understanding of evidence from law just wasn't there. Their understanding of legal causation, legal professional privilege, ethics, bias, those things, I was not seeing them in those safety investigation processes that were being taught. So my gap really was, my book was to fill that gap, to bring those learnings across from law and into a safety investigation. So the book is a collection of tools. It's all very practical. It's the sort of thing that if you have a safety incident, you can go to the book and look up what to do and follow that process.
Can you give me an example, especially on the construction side?
Yeah, totally. So I can tell you a bit of a story.
All right.
When I first came into construction, we had a carpenter on site who's been doing a bit of a remediation job, and they were ripping a piece of timber with a circular saw, and they were holding the piece of timber and ripping, and then changing their grip and ripping again. And at some point, the circular saw hit a knot in the timber and kicked back. And in that motion of the saw kicking back, the blade contacted their thumb. A really nasty cut. It's pretty much halfway through. They kept their thumb. They were eventually okay, surgery and all that. But we looked at that incident and thought, okay, well, they're a carpenter, and like so much of what they were doing screamed, incompetence. They weren't following the process. Everyone knows if you're cutting a piece, that needs to be clamped down. Circular saws are two-handed saw, but you certainly wouldn't have your hand in the way of the blade or anywhere near the blade. So it would be really easy to conclude your investigation with the guy wasn't following the process, disciplinary retraining, something like that. But we dug a bit deeper, and we talked to the guy. He was recruited from overseas through an agent, and we looked back at all the old documents that we had, his resume, his reference letters, and we noticed there was a lot of inconsistencies within the resume and the reference letters, and this had all been prepared by the recruitment agent overseas and compiled and sent to us and said, hey, here's a carpenter. But when we actually interrogated that information, it wasn't a carpenter at all. That was all fraudulently put together. And so it wasn't actually ever a carpenter in the first place. And what you might call the root cause of that incident was actually not operator incompetence. Yes, he was incompetent, but the root cause was a fraudulent recruitment agent overseas. And we were able to make a change then on that basis of obviously using a new recruitment agent, but that hopefully prevented the next non-carpenter coming to work for us as well.
So when an incident happens, what's the first thing you should do? I mean, I guess call 911 or get them help, obviously, but I guess from a paperwork side of what kind of documentation is necessary to make sure you're covered as an employer?
Yeah, so absolutely, employer liability is a big concern every step of the way. So I break it down into 3 steps. The first step is people. So who needs help and who's getting that help? And that might be calling 911. It might be first aid. It might be counseling if it's a particularly traumatic event. And then once people are getting the care and attention that they need, the next thing is property. Is there a fire that needs to be put out? Bearing in mind, this could all be happening within the first 10 minutes of an incident happening. But, is there a spill that's about to go into a stormwater drain that needs to be stopped? Anything like that, is the site made safe? And then the third step is notifications. So this is who knows and who needs to know. So this can be, on one hand, stopping the rumor mill and correcting the narrative that's out there about the incident, and also making sure stakeholders are informed. And one of those stakeholders might be your legal counsel. And there might be a need to start an investigation on the basis of legal professional privilege, for the purpose of obtaining legal advice. So that's when you would want to speak to your attorney and get the ball rolling in that aspect. And you'd probably want to do that quite soon, especially if you have a significant legal concern.
Good point. In the United States, we've got more and more states that are legalizing marijuana use. And the discussion always is, when an incident happened, if it wasn't life-threatening per se, or needing immediate medical attention, or even it did, the protocol was to get blood test. So if they went to the emergency room and they knew it was a work comp, they would automatically they take blood test samples. How do you deal with that as far as, well, it's legal to smoke marijuana, but it's against to operate machinery or equipment under the influence? And I guess what defines the influence too, because it sticks in your blood for so long.
Yeah, it's a really good point, and it's a bit of a challenge when you're dealing with that. So you're quite right, and I've experienced it myself, where some sites or some organizations have policies where after every incident people get drug tested. There's other policies where they only get drug tested if there's a good reason for it, full cause. And it will, in a blood test, I believe marijuana can stay in your system for many weeks, sometimes a couple of months. But from my perspective, it's about impairment. So by all means, follow the policies of the organizations you work for. But in terms of safety and risk, you really want to look at impairment. And I would say that if someone shows up with marijuana or THC in their system many weeks old, they're not impaired. Their judgment is not impaired. So if they've smoking marijuana before work that morning and they've had an accident, then yeah, fair enough, that's impairment. The next day, probably not. It fades pretty quickly. And that's different from each drug. So, methamphetamine, I believe, exits your system very quickly, but the impairment is quite severe in that first 24 hours. So each drug is different. You have to treat them all different. And to me, from a safety perspective, the key question is, are they impaired?
Got you. As an employer, you should have those policies, at least in writing or somewhere. That way you can protect yourself. If something does happen, we hope nothing happens at all, but you want to make sure those policies and procedures are in place just to cover yourself, right?
Yeah, and it also provides clarity to the people that work for you. If, depending on your stance, you might not have a problem with people smoking marijuana on the weekend. That's something that they're doing in their own time, in their own place, just so long as it doesn't affect you
Sure.
That's fine. So you'd want to make that clear in a policy just for the sake of clarity as well.
We talked about not necessarily what size company you are. So if you have more than one crew, is somebody on site responsible, like your working foreman, to say if something happens, here's what you need to do, here's who you need to contact, and so forth?
Yes. So you would want some sort of incident response process, and my recommendation is basing it around that people property notification format that I mentioned earlier. Different companies will have a different process, but the foreman, totally should know what to do, what phone calls to make, and I prefer to make it a really simple process. So in the organization I work in, everyone's aware that all they need to do is just make a phone call, and then that phone call will come to me. I'll be able to tell them what to do next. I'll ask them, hey, does anyone need medical attention that's not getting it yet? Okay, well, call 911, hang up the phone. I'll call you back in 10 minutes, or call me back in 10 minutes. And we'll work through that together. Some organizations are a lot smaller. They don't have that luxury of having a person at the other end of the phone. But it's just following those three things: people, property, notifications. Is a pretty good format for managing an incident response.
You talked about investigations. Does insurance get involved with some of that stuff?
Yeah, totally.
Investigations?
Yep. And certainly, in order to adhere to your policy wording, you will need to understand an incident. So there can be an insurance imperative. There can be a contractual imperative to investigate. In some jurisdictions, there's also a legal imperative to understand incidents and dissect that information and understand it. So there's plenty of reasons to undertake an investigation.
Do they assist sometimes? Are they in the investigation?
I'm not aware of an insurance company assisting. I know that when matters progress, when matters progress, they certainly have given us feedback about where we can improve our investigation, but I don't think they've ever participated in it. Not in my experience.
Okay.
Yeah, not at that level.
Can you explain workman's comp to my listeners? I mean, is workman's comp a U.S. backed insurance, or is it based on individual companies that provide it?
Depends on your jurisdiction. And I've worked in several different jurisdictions, and they've all been a little bit different. So workers' compensation insurer is mandatory in some jurisdictions. You have to pay for that, and it's a no fault system. So the worker does not need to prove that they're injured at work. It's automatically given, and it's if there's a dispute, the employer must disprove it.
Gotcha.
So that kind of ensures that the person does actually get the medical attention and the weekly income without having to fight for it. New Zealand's radically different again. They have a nationalised workers' compensation scheme, and you also can't sue for personal injury as a result. So it's quite a unique system.
When you said scheme, do you mean literally a scheme?
Some people could say terminology there.
Yeah, some people say, and then workman's comp could be a scheme too. A lot of insurances are schemes, and I don't mean that facetiously, but I do call them a racket sometimes. I get on a different subject about insurance, but basically, my belief on insurance was that they're here now to make profits. When they started out, they were to share risk. I wish they share risk more than they do today. Let's say you're a larger contractor and you have policies in place for safety issues, and you go to work for a company that has policies as well. What policy, I guess you could say the customer, but which one overrides the others? If you're injured on a site that has policies that you might not have followed, but you followed your policies, but they didn't follow theirs.
Well, it's kind of layered if you think about it in layers. And again, this is probably a bit more of a legal question, and so I can give you some useful information, but not advice. But
there you go.
You got to look at it in layers.
Yep.
So there'll be like legislative, legal requirements. There'll be contractual requirements. There'll be sitting alongside that insurance requirements as well. So you've got to consider that although you might have followed your own policies and satisfied your own employment obligations and insurance obligations, you might have missed some contractual obligations in not following the client's policies. If you think of it in layers like that,
Yeah.
you can kind of see where it might fit in.
Okay. Back to the investigation side. Is there any times where you've identified that it wasn't really your company's fault and it's somebody else's liability?
Yes. And it's a tricky situation to manage that. And you got to be really careful about the language that you use. So part of the tools that I share in the book is making sure that your language that you use is quite factual and it's evidence-based. So you say something, it's linked to evidence, and it's non-judgmental, not speculative, it's not an opinion, it's worded as a fact, and it's well-founded. So if you are going to present it to another stakeholder that potentially there's some fault there, presenting it in that manner is probably the best approach. Factual and linked to evidence.
Would it be best to get a legal counsel involved?
Yeah, look, if you have to ask that question, should I be speaking to my lawyers? You should probably just pick up the phone and speak to your lawyers.
Good
getting
point.
them involved early is a good solution or a good idea.
Okay.
Because they're going to be able to advise you against potentially making some mistakes early on.
I know you're a past lawyer. I know that legal terminology becomes very important, and you mentioned terminology, especially if you're getting someone else involved. It'd be you'd want somebody to read what you're writing or have them prepare it themselves, and then you review it, make sure it's what you believe in, and that would be important.
Yeah, absolutely. It's important to understand a little bit about how evidence works. And I talked about earlier, we talked about training and competency, right? And drawing a distinction between those two things. So you can look at a piece of paper that says that person's trained, but to really understand if they can do what it is they say they can do, you have to either speak to them and see that they understand it, or observe them doing it, or ideally both. So to know that I was a good forklift operator, you probably had to watch me in action and not just rely on the piece of paper that said I had a license. And that's really how evidence works as well. Direct observation, oral evidence are really powerful. And learning how to get those and understand them and dissect them and interrogate that evidence a little bit further. Learning when you're looking at good oral evidence and when you're not. Those are important skills. And that doesn't just apply to safety investigations. That can also apply to reading and understanding a report. If you're a board member and you're getting safety reports and you're getting production reports, learning how to interrogate someone, and I don't mean interrogate like you're in the FBI or the CIA or something like that, but
right,
learning how to question people to just dig deeper into that report when they present on it. It's a really useful skill. And that skill comes from a good understanding of evidence.
Not always is safety or an incident relied on the person itself in a mistake. Sometimes it's equipment, right? Malfunctions or poor maintenance. I assume documentation is the best way to monitor that. You mentioned incompetence to ride a forklift. Let's say you are competent, but the forklift's incompetent as far as needing to purchase a new one, or just not got the right safety or seat belts or whatever it is that on the forklift you might need. What's the best way to do that? Have a regular maintenance schedule for those things and documentation?
Yeah, totally. And it usually comes direct from the manufacturer, what sort of regime of inspections and servicing and maintenance you need to implement for that particular piece of equipment. And it's incredible how many times people don't read the operator's manual for the particular piece of equipment that they're using. And every time I read it for them, and I invariably I find something that's surprising in there. Just recently I had some people had some lawnmowers, and you think, okay, lawnmowers, everyone's got one, everyone knows how to use one. For this particular model, you had to take the spark plugs out every time you weren't using it. They had no idea, but then that would have voided their warranty. And so they weren't maintaining and servicing that lawnmower by not taking the spark plugs out. So the first step is really just read that operator's manual. There's always something surprising in there.
Is there a level to what what equipment would need maintenance. What I mean, for example, is that you got Milwaukee tools, and while they're very expensive and obviously need oiled or whatever it is, and they can be just as dangerous, say, a forklift. Is it considered all tools should you have a policy for, or it's just you got to decide as a company what's your risk tolerance?
Yeah, I think you need to decide as a company what your risk tolerance is, because you can draw the line at powered tools and maybe say anything that's powered, electrical, diesel, whatever. That's what we're going to put the maintenance schedule on. But then, how many accidents do we have in connection with ladders on site? They're not powered.
No.
Mobile scaffold.
A hammer could fall and hit somebody in the head. There's
exactly.
no power. That's just gravity. But somebody's not wearing a hard hat, for example, or safety equipment. What they call
so in
PPE.
my safety, So in my safety view, it comes down to risk. Am I going to service a hammer every 6 months? Probably not. But I'm going to check my ladder every day. I'm going to check my hard hat every day.
Mm-hmm.
Just a quick check, whatever. But it's based on risk, I think.
Well, as we draw close to the end here, what would be your biggest advice to any business owner, for that matter, for safety, and either for investigations or just preparing as a company for those bad days?
So there's a lot to unpick in that question, but I think I could narrow it down to one thing. If you're going to do one thing different after listening to this show today, that would be to talk to the people doing the work. And I say talk, but actually what I really mean is listen. And so you can just go up to someone and say, hey, tell me what's happening today. What's going on? What are we looking at here? And in that conversation, if you're approaching that conversation with humility and respect, and you're genuinely listening, that person you'll find is probably taking a decent amount of pride in what they do. You'll quickly be able to ascertain whether they actually understand what they're doing, whether they're competent or not. And you can understand the workflow and the processes and the challenges that they face just by listening. And I think you can make some pretty good decisions, but safety decisions based on that listening exercise. And it all starts with just going out and saying, hey, tell me what's going on. And it's the same with an investigation. If you're interviewing someone involved, the best question to ask in that interview isn't a question at all. It's just, hey, tell me what happened. Tell me the story of what happened. And then just sit back and listen.
I'm a big picture guy, and what you just said, I was thinking, it's a lot about culture, business culture. How important do you find safety as part of your company? And if you value safety and the safety of your people, they'll value it as well. And if you take that same mindset of safety when you bring new hires on, you'll get the right people, or you'll identify those that aren't in the same culture as you are, as far as how you want your business to be safe, you want your team to be safe, and still do a good job for your clients. So
yeah, totally. Like it's extremely rare that you'll get someone who intentionally caused an accident.
Right.
And it's felt quite acutely in safety, where there's to blame someone is not enough, in my view. If you're stopping there with just blaming someone for not doing the right thing, you're doing yourself a disservice. You need to understand why they didn't do that particular thing. And maybe it was lack of training or competence. Maybe it was the procedure they were given was unworkable. Maybe they didn't have the right tool for the job. Maybe they were deliberately maligned and deliberately wanted to cause some damage. But then you'd have to understand, well, how did we come to put a person in that situation where they would feel that way and do that act? Understanding that a bit better is invaluable, in my view.
Des, I think that's a perfect place to end our discussion today. We do thank you for your time. You can reach Des down in the show notes below. We'll have a link to his book, also to his LinkedIn profile. Is that the best way to get hold of you, Des?
Yeah, absolutely. LinkedIn, hit me up with a connection request, and I'll happily accept. And yeah, grab the book on Amazon is probably the best place.
And the name of the book again, please?
It's Beyond the Incident. So if you searched in Amazon for Beyond the Incident and my name, Desai Link, it should come up pretty easily.
Awesome. And as always, there's a link below if you want to reach out to me about something certain about your business for some consultation. That'd be great. Thank you, Des, again. God be with you till we meet again. Bye-bye, everyone.
Been a great pleasure. Thank you.